So Chinese people will always brag that they have 5,000 years of history. And that's like all the little kids know it. Everybody from China knows that their history is the longest, and they are so proud of it. And so much of the whole world's cultures and inventions developed off of Chinese culture. So they're very proud of their history and their heritage. And also, because of that, they have a lot of superstitions and little beliefs and traditions that really don't make sense, but they really stick to it because tradition's a big part of Chinese culture. And so some interesting ones that you will probably need to watch out for or keep in mind when you're going out there is, one is that you take your shoes off whenever you go into someone's home, or at least always ask. There are a few people who have been Americanized or whatnot who aren't so concerned about it, but 90% of the time you'll want to take your shoes off. And I would highly recommend getting slip-on shoes if you're a Chinese missionary. I had a pair of lace-ups and a pair of slip-ons, and eventually I just started wearing my slip-ons all the time because I just didn't want to tie my laces everywhere I went. And so I would highly recommend doing that. Also, Chinese people's eating habits are a lot different from traditional American etiquette. And so I kind of joke that when you go to a Chinese DA, you just take everything your mom taught you and you throw it out the window. Chinese people are just such skilled cooks that they can have 4 different dishes going on at once. They're over at the stove with all 4 burners working and going at work, and they just throw the plates onto the table and suddenly it's filled with all these different dishes. And so everybody who's at the dinner will get a little rice bowl and chopsticks, and from there you just kind of take your chopsticks and pick out whatever you want, and none of the like dishing out your own portions. It's just as you want it, you take it and put it with your rice and hold it up to your mouth and just kind of shovel it in. And so for those who can't figure out how to pick up rice with chopsticks, you actually don't. You just scoop it into your mouth, and you don't put your napkin on your lap. You keep it on the table, and usually we'll discard any bones or anything like that onto the napkin. And they also cut their meat a lot differently. I mean, you'll have a whole fish with the head, the bone, the skin, everything, and you pick at it with your chopsticks. The fish actually has a funny tradition because they'll serve it, and since it has the bones inside, so the skeleton and everything, you eat one side, pick all the meat off one side, but then you have to flip the fish to get all the other meat. And a Chinese tradition is that when you flip the fish, you can do it if you're on land, but if you're on a boat, you're not supposed to flip the fish, because the legend is that if you flip the fish, then the boat will flip with it. Those are a lot of need to knows. I suppose one last one is just Chinese people are very committed to their family members. And I think that's Americans definitely stereotype that. They say that Chinese believe in that family honor that you hear about in Mulan and all those other movies that are set in China. But it's a legitimate thing. And the parents really have high expectations for their children. And they're very hard workers. And especially in New York, where a lot of them come and are immigrants, they go from being doctors in China or professors to working in a restaurant or working as a truck driver. And in some cases, a truck driver is actually considered one of the nicer jobs. And it's fascinating to see that these Chinese people will come here and they'll go into these lines of work, and they will work 6 days a week for 12 hours a day. And that's something about the working and living in New York for a lot of immigrant families, is that they work 70 to 80 hour weeks, and they also have travel time built into that. A lot of times they go to either Long Island or upstate, and it takes a while to get there, and they'll only get 1 day off a week, and it's usually a Tuesday or a Wednesday. It's tough because Sunday is one of the busiest days for any business, and so it's really hard to get Sundays off for these Chinese immigrants. But they're such incredible, dedicated people. At the same time, when they commit to something, they really they commit to it. And so I do love that aspect of the Chinese culture, is just how much respect they have for one another and how much they're willing to do and work to achieve whatever they set out to do. So it's a It's an incredible culture.
I think one of the biggest thing is to take off your shoes right after you came home and to change your shoes. But I also think that when you go to places to visit Chinese people, make sure that you do it in a polite manner, to see how they're doing, and what the missionaries can be there to help them, how the missionaries can help them in many different ways. I think one of the things that don't be discouraged to not try to speak Chinese. Yeah, what I mean is just practice your Chinese as much as possible, because Chinese people, yes, they might not understand at first, but the more you practice, the more that they can understand. They really appreciate you, and also your Chinese will improve.
For Chinese, I can say a lot of things, and their views are more traditional, like more have a more strict formality to their ways of thinking, and about rules, and about everything have to be set in order, and in the society you have to behave in a certain way. In Australia, there's a lot of break away from the tradition, and there's a lot of freedom in thinking, in the ways they act, and also in the whole society. I think it's generally Western based, and it seems to me Australia culture, because it's closer to their British origins, is closer to the European culture. Is instead of just not being traditional, they are trying to break away from the traditional views and things. Like in Sydney, where I serve, they are very open about homosexuality, those kind of things, and they legalize a lot of things about it. The way of thinking, they're very open to a lot of things, but on the good side, they are also fairly open to other cultures, because I think Sydney was one of the places that I've seen the most diversity in a society. There's a lot of people from like all the places around the world, like Chinese, Korean, Japanese, even in Middle East, people from Iraq, Iran, a lot of people from India, and I've met quite a big community of Greeks and Lebanese, which are people I have never come into contact before my mission. So, generally speaking, the Australian culture is pretty open.
You need to know how to use chopsticks. Practice as soon as you get your call. Otherwise, you're gonna be pretty hungry pretty quick. Another important thing is, in Chinese culture, most of the time when you're eating, it's sort of a family style. You're not given a plate with everything on it. It's that everything is put in the middle of the table, and then you sort of just serve yourself as you go. And it can be very easy to just use your chopsticks that you're eating with and pick stuff up off the table, out of the dishes. Double check to make sure there isn't a pair there that you're supposed to use to serve yourself with. If there is, be sure to use the ones that are specially assigned for that dish, so it's not like the ones that are going in your mouth are. If the people you're eating with are, just using the chopsticks that they're eating with to pick up the stuff, then you're okay to do it, but you want to be careful, just to make sure that you're being polite. it's okay in Chinese culture to bring your plate up. Like, usually use your bowl. You don't use plates very often, but to bring your bowl up close to you, because it can be hard to, pick up, a big chunk of rice and from down here and get it up to your mouth. And so, you can bring the bowl up and you can eat into that way, because you're going to be a lot less messy that way, and it is considered, perfectly polite. So you can do that. When you're served something to drink, if you're at somebody's house who isn't a member, chances are they're going to automatically try and serve you tea. So you have to be very careful with that, because often it's going to be green tea. And so you need to just be aware from the very beginning. Ask for water. If you ask for water, chances are they're going to give you boiled water. It's going to be hot and steaming. That's what they usually will drink with their meals. They don't drink a lot of cold water. Even room temperature water, you don't drink as much. And so that's something you just have to be aware of. I always avoided slurping, but I think that's more just because that's something I was raised to do. Some Chinese people, depending on depending on their background, there's going to be a much higher tolerance for slurping. You can get away with a lot more slurping in Chinese culture. Some families, though, still won't like it a whole ton, but it's definitely less of a faux pas in Chinese culture than it is in, say, American culture. Another important thing, like if you see like, oh, there's only one piece of this thing left on the dish, don't pick it up and eat it. You can eat up everything that's on your plate that you've picked up, but never be the person who grabs the last piece on like the communal dish that everything's being served from. That's considered rude. It's the idea that, oh, I didn't make enough food. Like, I don't have enough money to buy enough food to keep you full. And so always leave some food on the plates on the table that things are being served out of, especially if that's fish and it's around the Chinese New Year. Do not eat all of the fish. Leave some. Fish represents prosperity. And so if you eat all of the fish, you're sort of dooming them to a year of really bad fortune. The Chinese culture, there's a lot of superstitions like that. And so the more that you can become aware of them, the better. Even if people aren't like super like they really believe them, it'll still like leave them with like a weird like feeling, if you're not careful. So you want to be careful of those.
I would say, first of all, there's a lot of discipline. They are really, I'd say, more into learning than we are, or than Europeans are, and they find more fulfillment in education and school than we would, which is why a lot of them were really fun to teach and almost easier to teach, because they had this love of learning and they could really sponge things in. They could memorize something and spit it back pretty quickly. And that's obviously not what learning the gospel is all about, just memorizing things. But when it came to the facts, they were pretty good at getting those down. Parents, definitely a huge attachment to ancestors is a part of Chinese culture, to the point where there were a few really sad occasions where you had a Chinese investigator who's doing so well and who really believed what was being taught. And then as their baptismal date approaches, they talk to their parents about it. And their parents are very against them being baptized into the church. They, once again, might fear religion a little bit. And so they kind of put their foot down and say, no, we're not a fan of this idea of the Mormon church, and we don't want you to be a part of it. And it's funny because there comes a point for us, the culture's a bit different, where you're in your early 20s and you kind of do your own thing and you stop listening to your parents. But some of these people were in their late 20s, early 30s, and still taking orders from their parents. And sometimes that worked to our advantage, in that their parents were very much for the Mormon church and encouraged them to be baptized. But there are other times when their parents were really against it. And to my knowledge, these people that have great testimonies still haven't been baptized because there's that family barrier. Buddhism, Taoism, and those are the two big ones. Very rarely would we run into a Chinese person who was already Christian in some way. most of them, I would say, are without religious belief. They're kind of taught that, secular things and things you can touch and things you can learn through five senses, like that's all there is. There's nothing more. A lot of people, I felt like the Chinese that weren't interested would kind of just spit out the fact that they were Buddhist because they didn't really want to talk to us, but were they really? It's hard to say. But the two, religiously, Buddhism and Taoism are the most tolerated beliefs in China. And they're the ones that you can actually kind of practice openly without any kind of fear. So, yeah, there was a lot of that. And a lot of just kind of blank sheets to work with almost. They're atheists, but not opposed to an idea of God. They definitely don't pray, so that's something you need to get used to. Obviously, your investigators will pray with you because they're used to doing it in lessons. There is a part of Chinese culture where, like, finishing, I think I'm getting this right. It's like more polite to finish your food than to not finish. And so, like, if you don't finish, then they'll just pretty much just like keep serving you more. And there's an ethical, I'm trying to bring it back into my memory. There's an ethical thing about not finishing and finishing and what that means. It's important to just be really grateful for the food they give you, because culturally it represents like a sacrifice, like they're sacrificing a bit of food to give to you. And if you finish, I think this is what it is. If you finish the whole thing, like you just clean your plate, that means that they didn't give you enough. And you're implying that you want more. Even if you're filled after one plate is clean, it's kind of implying that the food you give me was not sufficient. And so there is a certain statement when you don't finish saying like, that was really good, I'm filled now, and that you appreciated it. If we were teaching our Chinese investigators during Chinese New Year, they'd usually invite us over for a kind of celebration with lots of really good food and things like that.
The culture in Hong Kong is quite unique, I'd say. For example, like the teens or the students of Hong Kong, their life is pretty much school. Like they'll go to school in the morning and they'll be there all day until school ends, maybe around 3 or 4, and then at that time they'll go to these things that they call like a tutoring class, where they'll have more like just reviews on their subjects that they're learning in school or to do homework and whatnot, and they'll be there until late. Maybe some students I've heard are there till like 9, but maybe the typical student will probably be there till maybe 7 or 8. But they spend a lot of time there, and they have a very big focus on studying and just gaining knowledge and having a good academic background. Because for them, if they go to school and they fail in finding a job, then it's hard for them to really have a good life that they'll classify as a good life. So it's very important for them they'll always try to be the best in their class, and they'll try to get the best jobs because their social status is really classified by the job that they have. And so if they're like a accountant or a banker or someone of a businessman of high position, then they're really looked up to by people in the society. But if they really have a low job, or they don't really have a good education, then maybe they're not as looked up to, and it's hard for them to put an example for their kids too. So schooling is very important to them, and it's a lot more driven there than it is here in America, whereas people will drop out of school or they will take their own paths, and maybe some of them won't go to college and whatnot, but it's just a lot different in contrast. And as a missionary, it's important to know that they very value their time, that when you meet with them, something that is really important is to really get to the point, to understand them, but to get to the point where you can just tell them, your purpose here as a missionary is to do this and this and this, and we don't want to take too much of your time, but we'd also like to acknowledge that this is a very special message that we'd like to share with you, and it's worth your time. And it's very important to understand that background, and to let them know that we're not here just to take away from their schooling or add to it or somehow distract them from it, but rather to give them an opportunity to learn more and to help them in the future, to give them a better understanding of what we're here for. So that's very important to, as part of the culture and as part of being a missionary, is to acknowledge that, especially on finding on the street and things like that. But another thing that I would say is, in relation to the culture, is that the families they're very close knit. Most of the families there are they really respect the family, and they'll have maybe 3 generations living in one house. You know, they'll have the grandparents, the parents, and the kids, and they'll all be living in the same house. And that's not very it's very common to see that. And so it's very important as a missionary to acknowledge the fact that as a missionary, you know, like we really support families, and our church is really strong in the family, and we share this message, you know, that helps the family grow and to strengthen rather than to destroy it. Because the view in Hong Kong is that missionaries, or our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is a cult, and they'll say that, you know, we do bad things and we teach principles that aren't true, and the whole society, like as a whole, will most generally will say that we're not a good church. And so right from the start, we already have that disadvantage. So it's so important to be nice and to have that outgoing personality, but to be able to help them feel comfortable with you, because they don't want to let you in to meet your family or to meet, you know, their parents if they don't feel comfortable with you. So that's something that's very, I don't know, I thought was unique, that you really had to understand that each individual, they'd probably have a family that they really cared about, but at the same time that they really value the trust between you and them. So like if they don't really know you, they're not going to want to, you know, just let you into their home. So it's really important to gain that trust, I'd say. Yeah. With members or with people that invite you over to their house to treat you to maybe a dinner or lunch or whatever the meal may be, it's very important to eat a lot, or eat all the food that they give you at the minimum, because if you don't eat all their food, then they'll think it's like kind of like a hint or some sort that you don't like their food, and they just feel really disrespected about it. So I'd say a lot of time just if you're going to a member's house, to have a very empty stomach so you can eat all their food. Because I remember times in my mission where I've had companions who maybe were allergic to different foods, or they didn't eat certain foods, and so I'd have to eat it for them, and it wasn't ever fun. So eat all your food. That's a very important part of their culture, is to eat all the food.
Chinese New Year, their fireworks shows are amazing. Like, I'm sorry, but America's like just a disappointment when it comes to fireworks shows. After going to China, they have the whole of Hong Kong harbor just lit up, and they have like dragons, hearts, just like boats, and like in the air. Like it was amazing. And like just to watch that, and like it's full of foreigners too. Hong Kong Island is full of it's cool to realize too, because the way like Germans speak with like Chinese people, like Europeans speak with Chinese people, is English. And English is like such a dominant language. It's the language of business, and made me realize what a privilege it is to know English, and the fact that I was learning Chinese. And it was just to see the diversity of cultures was awesome. So many people from the Middle East, the Himalayas, tons of people from Nepal, India, Pakistan, Africa. Like we baptize all sorts of like people in Hong Kong, and the Philippines, of course, Indonesia. There's a branch called International That's just strictly where we just teach foreigners, and then obviously you speak English while you're there. And so the people from the sisters from the Philippines come, and they're, I shouldn't say this, but kind of like just, I guess, housemaids. Their lives are pretty difficult, but they're wonderful. A lot of them get baptized. They leave their husbands and their children back home, and in the Philippines, and they're working, and their pay is not great at all, but it's better than what they'd be making in the Philippines. And they're gone away from their families for years, and they just provide for them. It's kind of sad, because I know Elder Oaks and all the apostles have stressed that they should go home to the Philippines and just trust in God, but they all stay. They all, everyone's path is different, but they all stay for some reason. So I got to serve around them a lot, and it was a really humbling experience. Really spiritual time too in my mission, and just the Hong Kong is just, it blew me away with how crazy it was, just how different it was. They love basketball there, random. I saw someone with Darren Williams shoes on one time, and like Carlos Boozer's jersey, and of course they have like LeBron James. But it was fun. Like on P days, we'd go play basketball with them, and that was fun. Like we would win most of the time, of course, because we're bigger and we're Americans. But they have their own interesting rules when it comes to sports compared to America. They're in love with badminton. Badminton's a big deal there, and it was difficult. Like I was learning it. Like we would play with members sometimes, and I was like, "This is kind of difficult," you know. Like, but it was fun. And ping pong, I surprisingly did not play much ping pong, even though China's like big for it, and so I didn't play much. I had a couple companions who loved it, but mostly like basketball is like becoming even bigger and bigger there. And it's like Hong Kong is cool as well, because like everything that's made in China is shipped out of Hong Kong. It's like you just see the biggest boats, just those massive store. I don't know what would you call those boats? Just the ones that store like the big, yeah, and just massive, because Hong Kong is an island. So you look on the ocean. There's hundreds of them, just going to the locations, and like it was interesting to see like this is where all of our stuff comes from, and shipped from and stuff like that. So that was really cool. And these boats are just massive, and like fishing and stuff like that was great, and the seafood there was great. I didn't like seafood until I went there. They know how to cook. Such great cooks. Just the crab was delicious, and it's like the way they have this thing called hot pot too, where it's like you have a lot of your dishes out and you just stick it in for a few seconds and like you just eat it, but for some reason it's delicious. And it's like boiling water, and then you just got like raw meat and any meat, and you just stick it in for a couple seconds and you eat it, and it's so good. German mission, it got banned because a couple missionaries got sick from it, which was unfortunate because it was such a big deal to members. So that's another great food. So like, yeah, they love sports, they love basketball, soccer. It was cool because on our mission there would be like 18 missionaries that would play soccer in the morning all together, and you can't do that in a lot of missions because we lived in like, I had to compare like missionaries that lived like 100 yards away from me. There's 6 of us, 6 others live down here, like 4 others live down here, and we all just get together at a soccer court just right down the street and play soccer in the mornings. And like that was really cool. I really developed some great relationships because of that. And just playing sports, we play with the natives, and like just the unity that we had in our mission was fantastic. And just we all, and like now we're the greatest friends. And it really helped us become better because it motivated us to be better, because we saw some companionships as dominating, and we wanted to have that same, even though like sometimes you compare, but you weren't comparing, you were wanting better. It depends on how you saw it, you know. And it really helped. And so being around, for me at least, for being around all the other missionaries is a very great blessing to have.
So Hong Kong people, they're really awesome. Wow, I don't even know how to start. But like the experience I have now, like even just walking around BYU, if I see someone from Hong Kong or I see someone Chinese, I'm just like, I love you. And I don't even know why. Well, I do know why. It's because I served them. But there are so many things about their culture that are just so great. So I feel like Hong Kong people are really easy to love. Like I have a brother serving in Russia, and he has a really hard time sometimes loving the people that he serves because for whatever reason. But I feel like Chinese people are naturally very humble and respectful. So I feel like even in Hong Kong where people are busy and like sometimes don't want to talk to you, most of the time don't want to talk to you, but I feel like when you find those prepared people, they are so, so humble. Another thing I love about their culture is how much they place an importance on family. Like it's just kind of a given that when your parents get old, they just move in with you. Like mother-in-law and father-in-law will move in with you. And so they just really place a strong emphasis on families. They have different words for every relative. There's like, it's different to say grandpa on your mother's side and grandpa on your father's side. And like younger brother and older brother, younger cousin, that's a girl, older cousin, that's a girl. Like they're all different roles because the titles mean something because family is so important to them. What else can I say? I just love like the old people in Hong Kong because they're hilarious and they just don't care about what anyone thinks about them. Like the bakbaks, they're the old grandpas. They'll go out early in the morning, like in a wife beater because it's so hot there. And they just have like crazy hair and like, I guess it's lucky if you have a mole on your face and there's like a hair growing out of it, you'll never cut it because it's lucky. So they won't cut those and they'll have this weird facial hair going on. I don't know. But they have this thing where they bring bird cages out with birds in them and they hang them on trees so that they can listen to the birds, their pets, sing while they, you know, play checkers or smoke, whatever they do. So I just thought that was really funny. I always laughed at that. And then the pawpaws, which are the grandmas, they're always up at the crack of dawn and exercising, which is hilarious. Like they'll be doing squats at like 80 years old. And like this is so funny. So they have this term called bye-bye yolk. And bye-bye yolk means meat. And so bye-bye yolk is the meat that moves around when you wave bye-bye on the bottom of your arm. And so like they'll do these exercises like hitting the bottom of their arm to make it stop jiggling so much, which is hilarious. So yeah, I love the old people in Hong Kong the most, I think, but everyone is really cool.
I love the culture in Hong Kong because a lot of them are retired when they're 55 or older. You'll see a lot of the grandmas and grandpas. We call them sok soks and pawpaws. The sok soks are the guys, the pawpaws are the girls. And they'll just be out on the street doing their exercises, and the pawpaw exercises is just this, like hitting themselves to get the bad things out of their bodies. Or the sok soks will be gathered around tables playing Chinese chess. And you just like looking at them like, wow, you're so old, but they're so flexible because they stay active for so long. And so the sok soks will be crouching on their stools to play chess. And there'll be cheers when people make a good move, where the pawpaws will just be sitting there talking to each other, watching their grandchildren, or just chatting while the Filipino watches their grandchild. And a lot of the pawpaws will collect cardboard boxes for recycling. And so they'll just be like hunched over pulling boxes down the street. And they're just so dedicated to working hard. I think that's one of the things that I really admire about the Chinese people, is that they work hard and they're willing to work. They don't shy away from it. And they're very dedicated to providing for their families or living up to their parents' expectations and becoming a valuable contributor to society. And then the other thing I really like is just the way they celebrate. I guess I love the Chinese dress and the food for the different celebrations, and the public transportation and how they've got that all set up so you don't really even need a car, and it's much cheaper than having a car, paying for a parking spot, paying for gas. But it also helps them become more green. They're more ecology friendly, and they're even trying different ways to make their current transportation systems more green and make them better for the environment. So they're just trying to work together to make a better Hong Kong.
In most Asian countries, school education is really important to them, and so like you'll often find like kids start school at age 3 and they have tons of books and they have like hours and hours of homework. They do homework all the time. They're always going to tutoring sessions like in the summer and throughout the school year. It's really important to them. And then once they graduate, they work like usually like 16-hour work days. And so it's just, they're super busy people, but they are so much fun. One of my favorite things was going to the parks, and like the moms are there with their babies, and then the old people are doing exercises. And like one of my favorite things was the old men, they would always have this like bird cage. They'd come in and they'd bring their bird and their little bird cage and just like set it up on a tree and then like do their Tai Chi or like walk on the stones. And that was like one of my favorite parts about the culture. And then there's the grandmas, and they're all doing their crazy exercises. They have this equipment, and they just have the funniest exercises. But the people, they're really loyal, and they're really hardworking, and they're really dedicated, and they're just awesome. They're very giving people. One thing about the culture is if you go to someone's house, they always offer you something, to give you something when you leave. They're just super giving, and they show their love in different ways, but they're very loving people.